One. And we are recording episode 840, Sunday, June 12th, 2022, with Professor Dr. Theodore Postol. Dr. Postal, Ted, please introduce
Ted,
yourself, my
yeah,
man.
Ted is fine.
Please introduce yourself to all the listeners.
I'm Ted Postol. I'm an emeritus faculty member at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. My area of studies are basically science and technology questions that are directly related to national security policies of one kind or another. So basically, what I try to do is add value to discussions by simply providing people with technical facts that either describe the facts as we best know them and or the uncertainties associated with the facts.
So coming to you as President Tommy, I pull you aside and I say, Ted, how realistic is a limited thermonuclear exchange? Because I look at it, and my favorite book all time is Raven Rock by Garrett Graff.
Yeah.
All about the SIDAR, NORAD, the Greenbrier Hotel. It's all just about how we're all pretty much going to die. And
Yeah.
I've interviewed him, and it's one of my favorite episodes. And to me, one of the most, I've interviewed John Halderman, who is a Marine and was on a ship and witnessed Castle Bravo. When I hear it kind of being loosely thrown around in the last 2-3 months about a first strike, about a limited exchange, about containing it to tactical nuclear weapons, nothing in my short 31-year-old life has really ever sobered me up more quickly than seeing what I thought were mature, intelligent adults just loosely throwing out the term limited thermonuclear exchange. Is that even best case scenario possible, or should it not be something even uttered with any sort of air of rationality?
Well, I think there are two rather different aspects to this question. One is all of them are related to the problem of escalation. In other words, if one could imagine only one nuclear weapon being used, it would be a terrible event, but it would not be the end of the world. I mean, we did that, for example, in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We dropped bombs on 2 different occasions, killing a very large number of mostly non-combatants. So it doesn't follow that a small number of nuclear weapons leads to the end of the world, at least due to the technical details of those weapons themselves. The reason it is extremely unlikely that you could use a small number of nuclear weapons and not have it escalate out of control is both technical and social or political. It's both social and political. One way to, let's take the social first, because that's really quite important and everybody can easily understand it. The problem you have when something really bad happens, and if you're in a position where you have to make or you believe you have to make decisions, it's not, you may not have to make a decision, but you may believe you have to make a decision, and you don't have information, it's very difficult to understand what the consequences of your decision might be. So, for example, just look at something as horrifying but simple as the attack on the World Trade Center. Here you have the President of the United States. He's in Florida. He's speaking to school children. And somebody comes in and tells him the World Trade Center has just been attacked. He doesn't have any idea what's happening. It's not because he's foolish or silly he has no information. All he knows is that something bad is probably happening because his aides have told him and information is coming in. Nobody knows why. this World Trade Center has been attacked. Nobody has any idea how many other attacks could follow it. So, for example, at one point during this attack, I was in Washington during the attack, so I, in some sense, was very. I was in a building right next to the Supreme Court building, a friend's house, and we were watching this on television. And I was going to give a talk that night on, to a group of people. And when the building was struck, nobody knew that it would collapse. It's not clear that it would collapse. There are reasons why it collapsed, but a different structure might not have collapsed. Nobody knew whether there were other planes in the air that were on missions to attack other installations. We didn't know if there was another plane in the air that could execute an attack, or if there was 100 other planes in the air that could execute attacks. We just had no idea what the situation was like, and neither did the president. The president actually knew no more than I knew, sitting at this television, watching this horrifying event evolve in front of our eyes. We just didn't know. Now, in the case of nuclear weapons, of course, you would have no information. You have information a nuclear weapon was used, maybe. You might know who used it in the case of the Ukraine war. There's always a possibility it was somebody else, but I think that's improbable. So it would probably be a reasonable assumption to assume that it was a Russian weapon. But what are the Russians about to do? Are they going to strike many other installations with nuclear weapons? Is this just a shot across our bow to say, look, this is getting very serious. We need to start talking. Should we respond immediately? If the Russians have used the weapon, you can be sure that all of their forces have been put in a posture to suffer minimum damage if we strike back with nuclear weapons. So are they doing that because they're planning to strike back with more weapons? Or are they doing that just because they're doing what a military officer would assume is prudent, right? You, as a military commander, your job is to fight your forces and to protect them as best you can. So if you know that something bad could happen, an American response, even if you have no intention of firing another nuclear weapon, you might well go into a posture where your forces are as prepared as they can be for nuclear counterstrikes. This looks like you're preparing to do a nuclear counterstrike. So how does anybody unravel this situation in a short interval of time? And the answer is there is no way, because no one, either side, even the one that struck first, has no idea what the next step could be. Now, let's look at the technical. Okay, so I'm just talking about social. I'm just talking like, something happens in a room. Now there's the technical side. What kind of sensors do you have? In the case of the Russians, it's very improbable that the United States would respond massively going after their central strategic forces, because if you're thinking about the American mindset, you know that they're not suicidal, just as you know the Russians are not suicidal. So it would be kind of an act of suicide to try to destroy the Russian strategic forces. On the other hand, you have a satellite early warning system in the case of Russia that's inadequate. You can't tell when a lot of things are being launched around the world. You can see them coming once they're in view of a radar, but the radar is basically line of sight and the world is round. So you really only have 10 or 15 minutes valid warning. There could be problems with your radar or communication systems. A lot of effort goes into making sure that they are as robust as they possibly can be, but sometimes things happen. And you're sitting there and you're trying to get information from your field commanders, which would which has to do with their visual and their own communication systems and their own drones if they're using them, or data collection systems. But every piece of information is very small and isolated, and there's really no way to quickly get an integrated view about what's going on. And even if you have an integrated view, you don't know how to interpret it. What if you have an integrated view of American military forces operating in Europe? What would you know? You might see them taking cover. Does that mean they are preparing to execute strikes in response? So the problem is basically that nobody on either side, no matter who initiates it, doesn't matter whether it's the Americans initiating this or the Russians, has any idea what the next steps are going to be. And anything that could happen, inadvertent or not, will be interpreted in one way or another. So we know, for example, during the Cuban Missile Crisis in the 1960s, there were American planes that flew over Cuba that were shot at. Was it a hostile act? Yes, in some sense it was, but was it really an intention to start World War III or not? There were submarines that the Russians had in their military, deployed at sea. And the U.S. Navy at that time had an operational rule that if there's a submarine in the area, you force it to the surface because it's much less of a threat, even if it's not directly attacking you. So we start forcing these submarines to the surface. And what do the Russians know about this? The commanders don't know why they're being forced to the surface. All they know is that the Americans are dropping grenades on them. And does this mean they're about to be attacked by the Americans? Should they respond with the nuclear weapons they have on the submarine? The problem when you have a very dangerous, massive crisis is that your military forces, when they're very well commanded, so I'm not suggesting that they're, the American forces were well commanded in the Cuban Missile Crisis, but the officers did what was absolutely appropriate when you're prepared to fight against an adversary who may attack you. When you take those preparations, which is exactly the appropriate and responsible thing for the commander on the scene, because the commander on the scene is not the president. The commander on the scene is responsible for his or her military forces, keep them alive, keep them in a position where they can fight if called for. Those actions look aggressive to the other side, and both sides see each other in this escalating chain of actions and reactions. And the president or the premier, if it's Russia or whatever, they have no information about what's going on there. For example, if one of those Russian submarines had fired a nuclear torpedo and, let's say, destroyed an American aircraft carrier, all the American president would have known is that a nuclear weapon was used against an aircraft carrier. They would not know anything about the circumstances. So was this part of the escalation that was planned by the leadership in Russia? Or was this just an event that was not even thought about by the Russian leadership, but happened because military forces took actions that, given their narrow understanding of their immediate situation, seemed appropriate? So you have this situation where the political leader really wants to keep a lid on things for all the right reasons. But at the same time, the military forces at the lower level, they are reacting to their immediate circumstance around them. They are not under the control of the leader. And there's no way to get that information to each commanding officer who is trained to do what is needed to protect their forces and make sure their forces are in a position to fight and also to protect themselves. So any any idea that you can do something limited that would not have a very high probability of escalating out of control into a general nuclear exchange is really not understanding the most basic facts of how these forces operate and how limited the information is anyone who is in a powerful position might have. So my joke, I often joke with my friends that if you want to meet someone who knows next to nothing about the military situation, talk to a high level military analyst. Look at what happened. We have an example of this right here in front of us. Before the war, before Putin went into Ukraine, the general wisdom by everybody, and I want to indicate me too, all right? The general wisdom was that the Russian forces were modernized. They had solved a lot of their military problems from the past, and they were going to sweep into Ukraine. It would be extremely difficult for the Ukrainian forces to engage them and slow up their advance. Not only did our CIA predict that, but all of these independent analysts like myself wrongly predicted this. And very, very, very importantly, Putin's own intelligence and military predicted this. In other words, nobody knew the right answer. Nobody. Now, there were some people who looks like may have understood, because I saw a very interesting video interview with a guy who spends his time listening to bloggers from in the Russian military. So he was aware that there was problems with getting fuel before the fighting. There were problems getting equipment fixed, that there were problems getting secure communications equipment. And if you listen to this guy, thought that it was not going to be a cakewalk. It turns out he was in the minority. He wasn't in one of the big intelligence agencies, but in fact, he was the one who was right when everybody else was wrong, because he realized that this army that was always going to sweep across Europe in weeks without us being able to stop it. This is the whole NATO Warsaw Pact mythology of when I was, it's a little ahead of you, but I'm sure you know about it. And, all these forces that were going to be follow-on forces and all this, it was going to be cadres of armor, followed by infantry, followed by armor with heavy artillery support. Well, none of it happened in Ukraine. None of it. And that's a more modernized force. Now, unknown to Putin, his oligarchs took a good chunk out of his modernization efforts. And he didn't have an adequate system of oversight. And so he really didn't know that his forces were not prepared properly to go into a real war. He also had made other terrible mistakes, like thinking that Ukrainian forces were somehow not up to the job. In fact, it looks like they were superbly trained and ready to fight a war against what looked like a superior enemy, but in fact was not. And they were very well commanded. They had these light anti-armor weapons, and they used them very effectively against all of the logistics, destroying trucks with petroleum in them. Then they had these much more expensive and advanced anti-tank weapons like this Javelin, which has very excellent homing capabilities. They use those selectively on the most threatening targets, the tanks. And, they did a superb job causing this initial push into Ukraine to fail. There's no doubt all these arguments about Putin wasn't really planning to try to take Kyiv, and that's anyone who looks at the military operation as it evolved knows that knows exactly what he was planning. He was planning to sweep in a blitzkrieg, surround Kiev, entrap the forces fighting in the east, but with another thrust west of Kiev, encircle that force, and then crush them. It was going to be a World War II kind of panzer-like war, fast-moving armor, and crush the enemy. Instead, it just boop, went nowhere, just dropped in its tracks. And that's a big miscalculation. And it's not simply a miscalculation, it's because he did not know from his own people what he had in hand to do the job he wanted to do. Whatever one thinks of him, this guy is a very dangerous man. I mean, he comes out of an intelligence community, which incidentally is not unlike ours. We somehow talk about these guys like they're different from ours. I mean, go and look at the torturing that went on by our people, and tell me that they're better than the KGB. They're not clear to me. And so there's a kind of culture in these intelligence systems where you think you're doing the right thing because you're doing it for your country. And there's not enough oversight, and there's not enough feedback because security requirements make it very hard to get information up and down through the structure. So people on top really have a limited knowledge of what people on below are doing, even when they have the access. And so Putin didn't know a thing. He was clueless. And he made a strategic blunder that wipes out essentially all of his strategic successes prior to this, because he was very successful strategically. I don't like, I always try to tell people, I'm not an admirer. I'm not trying to say this man is a great man, but it's important to understand your adversary. And just because you don't like their values and what they believe and how they work doesn't mean they're stupid.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that they're not thinking. And you better keep that in mind, because they will surprise you if you don't give them enough credit. And Putin he's outmaneuvered us on every strategic situation we've been in, whether it's Syria or elsewhere. He's had less resources than we've had, and he's just jujitsu'd us. But this is a gigantic mistake that every victory he had is wiped away now. And maybe that's good. I don't know.
Yeah.
He's not a good guy.
No.
But on the other hand, we are not good guys either. And I think people need to understand that we played a role in this too.
Yeah.
And that's my main concern now. It's not that I think it's a bad thing that Putin did. There's no arguing that what he did was inexcusable, brutal, reckless, just horrifying, murderous thing to do. But we set the stage for this.
Yeah.
And history indicates how we did it. And I think it's a very bad idea for us not to look back on ourselves and ask what we did wrong and how we can get out of this if possible.
I think that's one of the most uncomfortable things I've experienced. Yeah, at 31.
Yeah.
Is really in the last 2 years. I started this podcast December 2019. Just throughout the course of this, the people I've interviewed, I've read more books in the last 2 years than I have in my whole life, is that sort of creeping awareness that we are not Captain America, that we are not some Marvel hero that always does the right thing. I do hold that we are the least evil, but you cannot, with any sort of straight face, read any book on the history of the Cold War, on any intelligence operation, from the Berlin airlift to Abu Ghraib. You cannot look at it and go, yeah, there's no reason why anybody should hate us. No,
Yeah.
you look at these things and you go, well, of course they think of us this way. Like, Why wouldn't you? You don't know anything. You're living on the backside of some mountain, and guys and blacked out with night vision fly out of a helicopter in the middle of the night, shoot your uncle in the face, who really was just a goat herder. What else are you going to grow up to want to do other than enact revenge? And that's just one example. Or NATO encroachment around Russia. I mean,
Yeah.
we're certainly not giving them, and it's very easy to sit here and go, don't give them an out, don't give them an inch. That's also not how the world works. And when we throw them off of the Swift banking system and try to sanction them into the Stone Age, are we not priming the arena for them to do anything other than resort to a nuclear weapon?
Well, it's very troubling. I mean, this is we don't want Putin to succeed in what he was trying to do in Ukraine, but at the same time, we don't want to push him and, in fact, the Russian public into a situation where they are so desperate they do something stupid. And I think there is a real grave danger of this. And unfortunately, I don't see our leadership really showing any understanding of this. And I've had the unpleasant experience of dealing with some of these people from the Obama advisors from the Obama administration and the and now Biden. And these people are amateurs, many of them. There are very few of them that really have a serious knowledge of security issues, but they just came from the right families. They were in the right place in society. And all of a sudden, they get promoted because the communities are so narrow and never look out beyond their little boundaries. They get promoted into these really important positions. Let me give you an example. I'll just, there's this guy, Colin Cald. He's a deputy secretary of defense now. I know him because he was at Stanford. This is the crime of the university now I'm talking about. They take this character, they make him a co-director of the Center for International Security and Cooperation. I was one of the people who helped build that institution. I'm no longer part of it because they have blackballed me out of it, but I wouldn't want to be part of it. So they make this guy a co-director. All right. So when Trump did this very unwise thing of withdrawing from the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, the INF Treaty, stop me if you think your audience will need more information. But Trump withdrew from the INF Treaty, and I got just angry because I knew that the United States had been violating the treaty for well over a decade. And the reason they were violating the treaty for well over a decade was because they put in these two, they called them Aegis Ashore systems.
Yeah.
Aegis on the shore.
Yeah.
Aegis on the ground systems in Romania and Poland. Now, anyone who looks at that system seriously will know immediately what they did is they had this wonderfully capable Aegis system on a ship. And when I say wonderfully capable from the point of view of a military system, it has these launch tubes which sit inside the hull of the ship vertically. And so what you do is typically a ship might have two 64 missile box launchers. So you'd have 64 missiles in one box on the forward end of the ship, 64 missiles on the back end. The system was designed from the beginning so it could carry any kind of missile that a ship at sea might need in warfare. So, for example, if the ship is going to defend itself against airplanes, it would have some of the canisters would have surface-to-air missiles in them. If it was going to have anti-ship capability, Some of the canisters might have anti-ship missiles in them. It may have also other ways to launch other anti-ship missiles, but you could carry them in the vertical box launcher. They modified it so it could carry anti-ballistic missiles, shoot down ballistic missiles. A worthless system.
Bullet with a
I
bullet.
if I were a Navy commander and had control, I'd say, give me another cruise missile. I don't want that thing. It's a waste of my.
You're not hitting it.
So, and it could launch cruise missiles and anti-submarine missiles, and the system was designed from the beginning to be able to do this. So the electrical interface is set up so that any missile can be plugged into it. It's like the USB port on your computer. Anything you plug into it can be, it has the electrical connections so that it can manage a hard disk drive, a CD drive, a video screen, microphones, So the interface, the electrical interface is already there. And all you need is a small piece of software to tell the system that it's talking to your hard drive or a CD or to a microphone. So the system recognizes the particular technical device and makes all the adjustments. It needs if you're talking computers, it's called a driver. Just gives you the driver for that particular hardware. Now, cruise missiles have their own driver, and the driver would fit on a CD, in fact, less than a CD or a thumb drive. And if you wanted to launch a cruise missile, if you didn't have the software in your system, although you would, all you do is take a thumb drive and load it in. It's just that simple. So it's no problem at all. And physically, everything in the system works. So now you take this system, which is designed to make a very, very versatile fighting ship. And what do? You dig a hole in the ground and you put the whole thing, all the canisters in the ground someplace. And then you say, this has no strike capability with cruise missiles. That's nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. It's a lie. All right, so I write this article, and I'm very careful in the way I write it. I try to write, I'm different in person than I am in my writing. I write this article, I very carefully point out how the Russians may have violated the treaty, like we were saying, but you ought to keep in mind that the Americans did. And so I write this article. It's very well received. To my great surprise, I expect it to be attacked because this current environment is crazy. I really expected to be attacked and ignored, but it wasn't. It was picked up by a whole bunch of other journals, and it caused a little stir. Not enough in my view, but a little. Because basically it was saying, the Russians weren't the only responsible party here.
Yeah.
And so I'm sitting in a seminar in Stanford, and this guy called is up on the dais, with the speaker. And toward the end of nothing at all about cruise missiles in this. He makes this statement in public about this guy Postol, he doesn't know what he's talking about. He's writing stuff about, INF, blah, 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 blah. So I go up to him afterwards, try to talk to this guy, although he's a moron for what he did. And he is a moron. It's outrageous. He's in a university. He's not willing to carry on a discussion about the facts that have been laid out. And he's making accusations in public against an individual who's well known in that university, because I was an early founder, not founder, but person in the center. And I go up to him and try to talk with him. He says, look, I don't have time to talk with you. I have a real job. How's that for a response? I have a real job. And he turns around and walks away. Now, this guy's a deputy secretary of defense now. He's advising Biden.
Oh.
All right. Now, either he's so arrogant that he has no idea what he's doing, even if he's intelligent, or he's just so clicked into presenting himself in a favorable way, in spite of the fact that he's been part and parcel to making policies that undermine the security of the country. He doesn't want to acknowledge it. So that's what's going on here. So, so these are people who surround Biden, and also who surrounded Obama. So I'm very critical of the Democratic establishment, what they call the security establishment, because all what you see are these younger people. Remember, I'm an old fart now, so um, you see these younger people. They're at your age, 30s, and terribly unexperienced.
Terribly inexperienced,
You can
unwise.
think you can think at 30. Don't worry, you can be very smart. So, but you see these people, and you listen to them talk. This is the key. And when you listen to them talk, you can see they're saying things to make it look like they'll fit in with the crowd,
Yeah.
the crowd that's already in there.
Yeah.
I have a former student, I won't say who she is. I've watched this young woman, she's not so young anymore, but she's getting older, just make these statements one after another that I know she doesn't believe. She's much too smart. She's pretty smart, but she's also ambitious, and she's not willing to do to run the risk of not getting into the right crowd. And when she gets into the right crowd, which I think will happen, she will do terrible things. She will support terrible policies. And that's what we're in right now. You have these people vying to get in to this establishment, whether it's the Republican establishment or the Democratic establishment, saying things that are acceptable to the people who are already inside it, who have a very strange and narrow belief system. So, of course, we're the good guys. You said it earlier. Most Americans, the overwhelming majority of Americans, have nothing but goodwill toward the rest of the world. It's amazing. I mean, I was literally earlier today, I was at a parade, and I was feeling so good watching these people march, and American flags flying. These people really want to do the right thing. But let me tell you, the government that represents them does not have those attitudes. There are a lot of people in the government that just think rolling over everybody's an adversary, and rolling over anybody who doesn't agree. You can be a nationalist who is not against the United States, but just doesn't want us to roll over you and take over your country, and you're an enemy. It has nothing to do with being a communist. It has nothing to do with being an autocrat. It's just that you are not going to comply with what we say you should do.
Yeah.
And that's enough to get you on the enemies list. So I think we're in for big trouble because the rest of the world is able to fight back now. It's beginning to get to a point where it can fight back. And we're not going to do well in the next decades, unfortunately.
Yeah. The idea of like American empire at all costs. You start with, we're going to hammer the Nazis, we're going to hammer the Imperial Japanese, unconditional surrender. But when you start applying that same ferocity to the rest of the world, when you start hitting with the same hammer the communist nail, as well as, I don't know, like sanctioning a European country because they're not on board with us, or bullying them into using our radar systems or buying our jets. What else do you expect than resistance?
Well, there is a problem. I do think that most Americans, unfortunately not reflected by the actions of their government, really want to do basically the right thing. And there's a very all these people who are supposedly, important decision makers in our government who worry about policy. They're really always afraid that the country is turning to isolationism, and it doesn't seem that way to me. It seems to me that what the country wants to do is not get in wars that we have no interest in, and that are not in our interest or not in the interest of whoever we're getting involved with. I mean, Afghanistan is a terrible place. And we did some very good things in Afghanistan over the 2 decades we were there, because we wound up, as part of our effort, creating a group of educated people. a tier of educated people, but the country is still basically what it was. And there was a great positive contribution in terms of providing opportunity for people to get educations, but at the same time, we really didn't fundamentally change the culture and the political culture there. And now these people are stuck and they're suffering. I would be happy to just make it easy as pie for people to immigrate to the United States. Those people who have the education and the interest, they will be great contributors to our country. I am not afraid of immigrants. I like them. And instead, I go downstairs. I live in a very nice building. I have a rich wife, so she treats me nicely. So
that's the
so I go downstairs.
The takeaway of this whole podcast is, hey, Tommy, everything I'm saying, forget the nuclear weapons.
Yeah, but I come in the other day. I see a new person at our concierge desk, and turns out he turns out to be an Afghan, and he was a translator for us. And I can't help but stop and chat with people I meet from those backgrounds, and then I'm chatting with him, and he was out, and he's in combat with our people. He risked his life, and he had a hell of a time getting into the United States. And you look at it and you say, how can this be? He was out there in combat with our soldiers. The word of our soldiers should be enough.
Yeah.
What else are you checking for? So and I'll tell you why. He's probably a Muslim, and we don't like Muslims. Don't ask me why. I mean, I've known Muslims throughout my life, and as a group of people, there are some are not nice and some are nice. And I think the man who helped me most in my career turned out to be a Muslim. He was the most saintly man I'd ever known. I never saw a man. This man was a saint on earth. If you believe in saints, you can't be a Christian. You got to be a Muslim, because this man was. I mean, it was just so amazing. And so why do you assume that these people are going to be a problem? It's just very disturbing to me to see the situation. But I guess we want to get back to nuclear weapons, don't we?
No. We will. But no, I was gonna say I completely agree with that. I mean, I'm lucky enough to have, through this podcast, become friends with former tier 1 operators, Delta Force, and then guys that went even above that and worked for the CIA paramilitary special activities division. And they were saying last summer when we were withdrawing, they're like, there are guys there that fought and bled with us, no different than any other special forces operator, and we're leaving them high and dry right now. Yeah. And they're getting rounded up, they're getting beheaded.
I mean, how can you do this? And so when you talk about the problems the U.S. has, which I'd like to see us solve, I should be very clear. I would like to. I don't think we're going to, unfortunately, because I think social forces are very hard to change. But I'd like to see us solve them. But just step back. People. It's not uncommon for people quite innocently. I mean, I'm talking. I have a very good friend, my lawyer actually, and he says, "Well, I don't trust these people." He just comes out with it. The other day we're at dinner. So I say, "Well, Ted, his name is Ted too," and I say, well, why should they trust us? We had an ABM, an anti-ballistic missile treaty, which is critical. I mean, if you don't think it's critical, look at China now. China was not planning to expand its ballistic missile forces until we got going on this missile defense stuff. So we have a larger, more dangerous nuclear strike force in China without getting any benefit, because these missile defenses don't work at all.
Yeah.
They just create a fear that they might eventually work, which then causes an adversary to react.
Yeah.
So you get the worst of both worlds with them. You get no capability, but you get the reaction as if they worked, which leaves you in a worse situation by far. Right. So we get out of that treaty. All right. Then we have Obama, who makes the decision after the treaty is to go with this sea-based missile defense system. Now, nobody in the White House, nobody could have known anything about the history of the ABM treaty who was involved in that decision. Because if you understood the ABM treaty, you would have understood why a sea-based system was the worst and most provocative thing you could ever build. Because when you look at the ABM treaty, this old treaty from 1972, a large part of the effort in that treaty was aimed at preventing air defenses from being upgraded in any way, no matter how minimal, to be able to engage ICBM warheads, because the Russians had a tremendous air defense system that we did not have. Anti-aircraft missiles all over the place, and the people who were negotiating the treaty with the Russians were worried that they would not abide by the intent of the treaty, which was not to try to do surreptitiously try to do things to give them some extra marginal capability. So if you look at that treaty, one of the things it bans is mobile ABM systems. Why mobile? Because if the system is mobile, you can concentrate it unexpectedly in certain places and defend those there if it works. Of course, it doesn't work, but that's another concern. All right, but if it works, you have the potential to concentrate it in places where you choose to defend, where the adversary cannot make adjustments quickly. So in order to make the treaty, the ABM treaty, not subject to pressures to break out of the treaty, there was an enormous amount of detail went into banning any kind of mobile system, whether it's an anti-aircraft system that has some capabilities to shoot at ballistic missiles. It was just a litany of declared statements, agreed statements, throughout the history of this treaty, because there was a standing consultative commission where people, Russians and the Americans, were talking with each other all the time. This was a living document. So what happens? Bill Clinton, he decides that the THAAD system, this Theater High Altitude Area Defense System, that it's not a violation of the ABM treaty, which it was. Why? Because Bill Clinton is being pushed by the right of the Republican Party, and he doesn't want to look like he's soft on defense. So because he's more interested in undermining Republican attempts to take votes from him than he is for doing the right thing for the future, he goes ahead with this THAAD system. He tells the Russians, if you don't like it, tough luck. So they swallow it. So that's going on already in the 1990s. Then he goes ahead and he has this system that we're currently building, which was originally, they keep renaming these systems just to keep you off balance. There was the 3+3 system. This is the system that we're still working with, the ground-based missile defense. Started out when Bill Perry, a hero of the left, but not so heroic at that moment, he declares that we are going to go ahead with the 3+3 system is the system we're currently building, which has no capability because it can't deal with decoys at all. And we were going to put ourselves in the position that within 3 years of the decision to go with the 3+3, we could decide whether we could deploy a full system in 3 years. So that's I think 97 or 8. So we're already into the early 2000s. So Bush wins the presidential election. And by 2004, he takes us out of the ABM treaty in order to go ahead with this 3+3 system, which of course he renames ground-based missile defense system. And of course, it can't hit anything, even when the target is a strapped down chicken. I mean, it has no ability to hit anything except, so, and of course it has no ability to deal with decoys. So its effective capabilities in any kind of serious combat situation would be zero. But we withdraw from the ABM treaty. Okay, so then comes Mr. Obama, the good guys, the Democrats who believe in treaties. So what he does is he deploys this mobile system, which is as bad as getting out of the ABM treaty in terms of creating fears that lead to incentives to expand nuclear forces. That, that's worse than even the ground-based missile defense system, because this mobile system is going to have hundreds of interceptors, not a few tens of interceptors. So what does he do at the time? We have the 2009 reset, right, where Hillary Clinton is going to show the Russians that she's really wants to work with him. So what the Russians do during the reset is they open up a corridor, an air corridor, so that we can fly directly into Afghanistan and resupply our forces in Afghanistan. 4,000, 4,500 flights a year through right over Russian territory into Afghanistan. That was in 2009.
I never knew that.
It's hard to find it. I knew about it, but I knew about it and knew it happened, but I was looking for it. It's very hard to find in the press. It's interesting.
It is.
So the Russians, that's a big that's a big gesture on the part of the Russians.
Yeah.
The Russians also cancel a $10 billion deal with Iran to sell them these S-300 air defense systems. So we don't want Iran to have air defense systems because we want to go there and beat them up whenever we feel like it. And, the S-300s, could make it difficult to do and costly. So what the Russians do is they cancel the system. Ahmadinejad, then the leader, he goes nuts. So Russian relations with Iran just go into a ditch. But they did this because the reset. So what do we do with the reset? We tell them, well, we're putting in these land-based missile systems in Romania and Poland,
Aegis ashore,
which we say doesn't violate the INF treaty, the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. And by the way, this is not negotiable. We don't want, there's nothing you can say to us that will cause us to do things differently. This is what we are doing. Suck it up. Okay. Now, is there any surprise that by 2012 or 13, everything had fallen apart? If you listen to this guy, Mike McFall, another guy at Stanford, who was directly involved, when he came to Stanford, he knew nothing about this system. I was at Stanford before he came back from the Obama administration. So we start talking about this system, and he's very cautiously asking me things about it because he knew I'd done a lot of work on it and written extensively on it. And it's clear he doesn't know anything about the system, and he doesn't want to show me how little he knows. So he's asking me these circumspect questions. But at the same time, he was involved in talks with the Russians where he was telling them for Hillary Clinton, this is not a negotiable deal. But today he stands up and he talks about the Russians being responsible for the collapse of the 2009 reset. Now, this guy is a professor, right? He's supposed to be a scholar. If he wants to be a political hack, then he should resign from Stanford and be a political hack. But if Stanford lets him act like a scholar when he promulgates false information, they're responsible too. So you see, there's a whole, so you're seeing the world as I see it, which is maybe a crazy world. Maybe I'm nuts, but I see a breakdown in integrity everywhere I look. Because people threw people out of faculty positions at universities and at the end of the Vietnam War, because faculty members thought that these people had gone beyond what a scholar could justify. It's not like you and I, as scholars, have an argument and it's based on different interpretations of the same, facts that we agree on, or we have differences in how we understand what the situation is, and you can all look at it and say, look, there's an honest difference here, And so your view, I can't say it's wrong. It's just, it's another view, and it's legitimate. I just don't agree with it. That's not going on here. This guy is promulgating false information, false history, and using that false history to blame the Russians for things they did not do. There's plenty to blame the Russians for. Take me, I'm happy to blame them, but not for that. And this guy has been stoking war, war and aggression toward the Russians ever since he's been out of government. So, and the university lets him do it.
So it's like you and I both looking at the Mona Lisa, and we have different interpretations. You say it's about a woman smirking. I say it's about me sucking at T-ball when I was little. You're like, I don't really agree with that, Tommy, but I can't. We're looking at the same thing. You're telling me how this picture evokes those feelings.
But I'm not telling you she's not smiling. She doesn't have, I'm not telling you. I can show for sure she doesn't have a smile on her face.
Yeah, and this guy's looking at it and saying she only has one eye and her hair's on fire. And you're going, that's objectively okay.
Yeah. So you have these scholars who are at these, Stanford's a very prestigious institution, and they're spreading false information in order to make a case against the Russians going into Ukraine. Well, there's a good case for the Russians going against the Russians for going into Ukraine. They should not have done it.
Yeah.
There's no excuse at all, even if he had the forces to do it. Okay. It was the wrong decision. It was a brutal, inexcusably, ill-considered decision. But that doesn't excuse the behavior that led to him taking those actions. And, you have a man in a hostage situation, and he's threatening to shoot hostages he has. And you go in there and you spook him and he starts shooting hostages. Who's responsible for not trying to negotiate the situation away without loss of life? So, certainly he's responsible. He's taken hostages. This is not a nice person, whatever. But doesn't make you responsible that you go in there and spook him and he starts killing people when there are other things you could have been doing. Sometimes you had no choice. That's true too. But this is what's going on these days. And people are just they're looking to place the blame. And the problem is not that the Russians are getting treated unfairly. The problem is that we're not learning from history. And if you don't learn from history, you can be sure you are going to repeat it.
Do you think, and again, I don't know how, not that you have a crystal ball, but I'm going to throw the responsibility on your shoulders anyway. Do you think our act, because the first thing I thought when I saw people floating the idea of like the first nuclear strike, I was like, this is too insane. The more time that it's passed, I've looked at it and wondered, is there something I don't know? And I look at something like the Sprint ABM, right? The Sprint anti-ballistic missile, which is the most, anyone listening, Google it, YouTube it. Was like
it's an impressive system. A little
0 to Mach 10 in 5 seconds or something. 100
3 seconds,
whatever it is insane.
3 seconds.
You watch the videos of them. It looks like one of those old.
It's hotter on the outside than the inside.
It looks like one of those old timey 1910 videos where everything's sped up, but it's real. It's real time.
Right.
And then if you look into that, there was actually another program sort of under it called the HIBEX, HIBEX, which one had 4 times the acceleration of it, had 400 Gs.
Yeah.
And then looking at, and I know it was mostly a bluff, but the Strategic Defense Initiative, Star Wars, and Lieutenant General James Abramson, you can go find all the speeches of them back in the day talking about particle beams and lasers and missile garages in orbit and all that good stuff. And it's been, we're 4 decades removed from it now. Part of me is wondering, it doesn't excuse our own arrogance and our own hypocrisy and our unwillingness or willful arrogance or ignorance of the past. Part of me thinks it might be also that like there's a new toy in town that I don't know about that's maybe classified. Do you think that could justify any actions, or is that giving them too much benefit of the doubt? Is it no, they're in ivory towers and they're so high up that they're not getting enough oxygen to the brain?
Well, I think first of all, um, in the technology area, not necessarily intelligence, it's nearly impossible to imagine anything that is truly revolutionary that you can't deduce is either possible or might be being done
Sure.
in what's called the black world. So yeah, somebody might have a very sub-hypersonic stealthy vehicle, although that's a problem because of plasma sheaths. But you there's enough money floating around in that world that they could do things, and they did some amazing things. The SR-71, for example,
Yeah.
remarkable technical achievement, remarkable. And the spy satellites we were launching were remarkable achievements for the time, and the early warning satellite systems that we first launched in the 70s. These were when very, very good people were in the system. And there's still some very good people, but it's not enough. And the system has ossified. So I think that there's very little that's really likely to be groundbreaking. It could be, but it's highly improbable. Most of the people I have encountered where I've had debates, or I don't know if you want to call it skirmishes with, or I try to make the discussions civil, but where they trot out, well, I know something you don't know. It turns out not only do they don't know anything. They're just first of all, in my experience dealing with very sensitive matters, you don't even say, I know something you don't know.
Yeah.
You would never say it.
Yeah.
If you knew what you were doing, you would never say, I know something you don't know. You'd never say it, period. I know, because I've been in that position. Just never say anything. And the problem, again, is that just because people have access to classified information, it doesn't mean that what they think they know is correct. I was just on the phone with an old friend of mine. He's reminiscing with me, and we were talking about all the documents that we went through at the Pentagon when we were working on things together. And we did a lot of damage to a lot of bad programs, and how almost none of them, he inherited this library from me, because he came into the Pentagon after I left, which he called his great classified library, because whenever I found a document that was really informative and well done, I put it in my safe. And I had drawers and drawers of safes filled with really important, informative documents about sensitive areas in technology and operations. And I was working for the Chief of Naval Operations, so I had pretty good access, and all of it was uncatalogued, of course, which was against the rules, because you couldn't spend your time cataloging it. And so he comes in and he finds this, and he says, wow, but the joke between us is that there was hundreds of times other documents that weren't worth the paper they were printed on. They were just nonsense. They weren't even wrong. They had no significance of any kind, and they were classified. So someone reads this, and I know that the Russians mean to do this, and I know that the Russians mean to do that. What do you know? Somebody talked to a janitor at some facility, and they said, well, there were these big cables coming. I literally had a conversation like that. They had interviewed this guy, and there's a janitor could be a smart guy, just wasn't lucky enough to get educated, but he was a janitor. He had no formal knowledge. He says, oh, he had this giant cables, power cables coming out of that facility. Well, it could mean something, and it could mean nothing. We found facilities when we, intelligence gathering where there were very large energy support systems going into some place, and we said, what's going on there?
Yeah.
So they cued us. So it's not as if, but that doesn't mean that they have a giant laser being pumped by these cables that nobody has ever seen before and defies the basic physics of what laser propagation. And there was a lot of that stuff in the intelligence community, a lot of it. And I found it very disturbing because very few people in the intelligence community that I met were adequately trained to do the jobs that they were supposed to be doing. So when I first came to the Pentagon, I said to myself, oh, I'm really interested in the Russian ABM system. So I find that the Defense Intelligence Agency has a unit that spends all of its time looking at Russian radar systems. Wow, I'm going to go over there and talk to these guys. And so why does the radar have this waveform? Says, well, I don't know. Why did they choose this frequency to operate? Well, I don't know. So I start getting books on radars. Great book. If you ever, Skolnick, Skolnik, he's a great guy. You find out what the waveform is optimized for from Skolnick. You find out why the frequencies are chosen from So my education was really first to find facts, and then the next part of it was to use unclassified technical sources to understand why those facts made sense. But the people couldn't tell me anything. It was astonishing. It was just astonishing.
Could it be
all these intelligence guys? I'm sorry?
Could it be possible that it's muddying the waters because you're never going to stop 100% of moles or traitors or whatever? Is it possible that not only do you compartmentalize everything to make it impossible for like lateral and vertical information
there
transfer,
is a lot of,
but also muddy the waters?
yeah, but if you have a unit that's job is
That's
looking
true.
at the Russian radars,
That's true.
and they can't tell you why a radar uses a different set of frequency bands, there's something. I mean, today somebody shows me a picture of a radar and identifies the frequency band. I can tell you almost instantly what it's for. It's because I've learned a little bit about radar technology. The technology is universal, and everybody uses it. Everybody that's a technically advanced country, because it's so valuable. And so it's astonishing that you have a unit filled with these people and they can't tell you the most basic things about them. They can show you a picture and they can give you a document with the frequency and the power estimated by somebody who's a contractor who's outside. I have a very good old friend who worked at Lockheed. He used to, this real interesting character, real iconoclast. And I always would joke with him, he designed the SS-18. The SS-18 is this very large. Well, what happened is he was at Lockheed, brilliant engineer. This guy is just like, was born genetically engineered to be an engineer. And he was involved in the submarine launched ballistic missile program. That's where I met him. He was Navy's submarine launched ballistic missiles. It turns out that he's so skilled, so knowledgeable about missile technology, because he's he loves engineering. There's nothing he won't spend time to learn. They picked him up, and the National Security Agency had, it was secret, a very sensitive piece of information at that time, but now it's not because the Russians know. But we had managed to break into some of their communication networks, and he could listen or have it translated to him what they were talking about in their equipment, with the equipment, construction. And we also were, when you test the rocket, you have what's called telemetry. Everything on the rocket that you can possibly put an instrument on, you do. And you send, the rocket thinks it's going this way, well, maybe it's going this way plus or minus a small difference, and because you track it. So you want to know everything that the rocket thinks it's doing, and you want to know you want to know everything about the rocket, what its internal systems are doing. So you have tremendous amounts of telemetry. Well, we had figured out how to read their telemetry. So in some sense, we knew as much about a missile test as they did.
Mhm.
So he would read this telemetry, and he never knew what the rocket looked like. But but he said, well, must have this, and he designed something on it. Throws out warheads this way because it looks. Anyway, I took him to Moscow like 20 years later for a visit with the for talks we were having with some Russians about arms control negotiations, and of course this guy's a character. He somehow finds one of the Russians in the crowd of Russians speaking to us is a missile engineer too, and they bond. and the guy takes him out to some museum that used to be secret, but is no longer secret at that time. It was the Gorbachev period, and he shows him the rocket that he had designed from the telemetry. And he comes back and he says, it looked exactly like I guessed. So the reason we had, and I remember when I was in the Pentagon before I had met this guy, I was looking at a very well-written, extremely explanatory and understandable document about the SS-18. That was this guy wrote it. In other words, he had been involved in listening to the telemetry, and he wrote this document. I didn't know who he was. I remember at that time I didn't know. I had almost no experience when I came in. So I said, "Where did we get all this information?" I just didn't know. And years later, I run into this guy, and I learned that he's the guy. So I always say he's the guy who designed the SS-18. So these guys in the Defense Intelligence Agency who have this radar data, someone put it together who knew what they were doing. They found somebody, probably some guy at the Naval Research Laboratory, which does a lot of radar, or MIT Lincoln Laboratory, who's a real expert in radar, gave them the intelligence, and then they produced a document that explained how the radar works and what it does. Here, these guys have these documents. They don't even know how to tell me about the documents. So tell me which documents I could use. I mean, it's a vast system filled with people who are dangerously incompetent, I'm afraid. So I don't have a high regard for intelligence. I mean, I know intelligence people who are incredibly capable and smart, and I hold them in very high regard. But the agencies themselves, they're bureaucratic nightmares.
Do you think? I know we've gone over an hour. Are you good at doing like another 15 minutes or something?
Yeah, we can do it.
Okay. Do you think anyone has the big picture? And I know by design, no one is supposed to, because you don't want to have one person that you could kidnap and then it's just an intelligence total coup. Do you think there's anyone? I mean, is there some like stereotypical? Is there some general in some bunker that has the big picture, or some AI? Or despite all of the wonderful technology and hypersonics and whatever, ultimately, is it still just a bunch of just kind of bumbling idiots?
Well, I wouldn't call them bumbling idiots, but bumbling human beings is
Okay.
maybe a better way to
Okay.
describe it. And I have met some. I've certainly met some superbly capable general officers, and I have met some officers, and I just look at them and I say, "How is this possible?" I mean, literally. And so, among these really capable military officers, there are some who have a relatively broad picture. I wouldn't say it's comprehensive, but I don't think anyone could have a comprehensive picture. In the civilian oversight, I haven't met anybody that I really thought knew what they were doing. There might be Well, there might be certain people. Pierre Spray was a guy who talked, he was a very broad, but he was probably closed in. I'm certainly, I mean, I have a pretty broad picture, but I wouldn't claim I have the kind of picture you're talking about. Um, but the civilians who advise the president typically don't know what they're doing, from what I can see. Let me give you an example. James Clapper.
Yeah.
He was of course, Obama's head of intelligence. What do they call him? DNI, the Director of National Intelligence.
Yeah, DNI.
I was looking at the nerve agent attack that occurred in 2013 in Damascus, and there's technical information I was able to derive on my own, and then as time has passed, more of these guys write their memoirs explaining how great they are, what great guys they are, what geniuses they are, how well they did, and so. So I now have a general insight what happened when this horrifying nerve agent attack occurred in 2013 in Damascus. And one of the critical pieces of information that I developed, not them, was that the munition, the rocket that carried the sarin, the rockets that carried the sarin used in that attack, could only travel 2 kilometers. The reasons were the rocket, it looks, basically they took an artillery rocket, with these slim, long rockets, and they took the warhead off the artillery rocket, and they took a barrel with a sleeve inside it and slid it over the top of an artillery rocket and created a rocket that was like a barrel propelled by an artillery rocket. Well, the aerodynamic forces on this are tremendous.
Yeah.
So it's like a balloon, it slows up very fast. And the weight of the payload now is, instead of 5 or 6 kilograms or 10 kilograms, it's 50 or 60 kilograms. So you take this rocket that has a 20-kilometer range normally, and this range goes down to 2 kilometers because its aerodynamics has been destroyed, and it also has a payload that is tremendous relative to the rocket propulsion capabilities. So I did the work on this. I started because I was interested in this, and I didn't know in advance that the rocket would be such short range. And when I first did the calculations, I actually didn't believe them, and I went back into the literature on drag coefficients. I did a lot of work to find out this simple fact: 2 kilometers range. So I happened to be talking to my brother-in-law. He's a former intelligence officer, smart guy, technically sophisticated, but not broadly technically sophisticated. And I described this to him, and he says to me, "Well, of course, we saw this in Vietnam." So what are you talking about, Rick? He says, "Well, in Vietnam, when we were fighting in Vietnam War, the Vietnamese would take a barrel filled, in this case, with explosives, and they'd put a hole in the middle of it, and they'd stick an artillery rocket through the hole, and they'd launch this barrel filled with explosives at us." And I'd say, "Well," he says, "then they had a range of 1 or 2 kilometers." So, so this guy knew off the top of his head what it would have taken me, a week or two of serious analytical work. So what that tells me is that if there were experienced people in a team, if he were on a team of experienced intelligence analysts, he would have caught this because he's smart. In other words, he would have looked at this and said, "This rocket can't travel 20 kilometers." He would have known this. So Clapper Clapper comes up with this explanation to the president, to Obama, telling him that these sarin barrels of sarin were launched from tens of kilometers away into Zamalka, this suburb that was hit with all these this nerve agent attack. Well, they couldn't have been from tens of kilometers away. They could only have been from 2 kilometers away, which was inside the rebel-controlled area. So there were people inside the rebel-controlled areas who were launching the rockets into this location. Now, why? Well, if you know that the president of the United States is going to attack the Syrian government and blame them for it and attack the Syrian government for this, why not kill a few of your own people? These are not nice people to begin with. You know, these freedom fighters. As so I point this out, and then I start looking for so they write up. So what happens? This guy Ben Rhodes, who's another genius in the Obama administration, National Security Advisor staff. So Clapper says, "Why don't you write up a report for the public?" So they write up this report, and it makes all these statements, which, if you knew technically what you were doing, absolutely could not be true. They could not be true. So, could not be true that the sarin rockets came from Syrian government-controlled areas. It could not be true that we could tell where they were launched and where they were from. We could tell that rockets were launched because but we can't tell what direction they're launched in, and we can't see the impact because unless it has an explosive warhead on it, we can't see that. So, because I know more about the satellite capabilities of our early warning systems than Ben Rhodes does, who's advising the president and writing a report for the public. Okay, so who is this guy? Well, he comes from a good family, good wealthy family, privileged family. He's gone to all the right schools, and he's worked his way up as an important Democratic policy analyst, and he's advising the president. Nobody on the staff, including Clapper, the director of national intelligence, understood the basic capabilities of our early warning satellites. Some guy who's outside, some pinhead guy at a university, knows more about it than the guy who's advising the president. Well, what does this tell you? You ask, do you think that there's someone in that group of people that have the overview? I'm not so sure.
That's terrifying.
Well, it should be terrifying. And I can't get this article published. The moment I start talking about this, the editor says, it's not believable. Well, what do you mean it's not believable? You tell everybody, including the UN, accepts that this rocket goes 2 kilometers. When I published this result a few days after the nerve agent attack, the UN was surprised, and the UN team brought in a team of experts to do an independent calculation, and they got the same result I got. So the UN knew it too. So now you might ask, the United States has this claim that the Syrian government did it. The UN knows that the rockets could not have come from the Syrian government-controlled areas. Why have they not said anything about this? What good is the UN as an honest broker if it doesn't say anything about it? You see, you're getting into my mind. You're beginning to see how I see the world. What is the Director General of the UN doing when he sees the United States making this claim? I can tell you what he's doing. I'm not going to say anything that contradicts what the United States is claiming because they give us a lot of money, and I don't want them running me out of the UN like they do anytime there's an ambassador who gives them a hard time. That's what he's saying.
Yeah, I've got a good job.
Yeah. So there's not a lot of independence in the system that and wisdom in it.
You were never able to get that published?
Not yet, but it might take another 5 or 10 years, but I'll do it.
I was gonna say, you just bring the paper on here. You can read it and walk me through it. I don't care.
Yeah, I mean,
Publish it
I give
here.
you a talk on it.
Do
I'd be
it.
happy to give you a talk on it. I
Put it
put
to,
it together.
put a PowerPoint together. We'll sit here.
I have a PowerPoint.
Let's
I
do
can
it.
put
Screw them. We'll
Yeah,
publish
no
it
problem.
here.
I've
What do I
given
care?
PowerPoints on it.
What do
I
I
think
care?
there was one PowerPoint I did that was taken off YouTube.
Well, hey, I got permanently banned because I kept interviewing Dr. Malone and Dr. McCullough. So it wouldn't be the
Yeah.
first time that we've
Yeah,
we've,
yeah.
we've published the verboten information.
Why not let them talk and disagree with them if they should be disagreed with? I'm not even saying they should be.
Because
What is going on when you can't provide an analysis, and I'll tell you, the people that they led analyses from are people who are not qualified.
you
You probably know of Mr. Higgins.
they know deep down that they can't stand up to it in the arena of open debate. So you have to.
Well, that
squash
may
it.
be. I don't know
That's
what
it.
it is.
That's all.
I don't know what it
If
is.
you knew it was truly wrong, if I sat here and told you that the Mona Lisa is representative of me being terrible at t-ball,
Yeah,
you're not going to censor me. You're going to go make a fool of yourself, man.
yeah.
That's what
Well,
it is.
maybe that's it. I don't know.
I think you should absolutely come on here and publish your paper. Who cares? What do I
Well,
care?
I think there's a mindset that there's a lot of misinformation. A mindset among people who would be otherwise, they should know better. Let me be clear. They should know better, but otherwise might be reasonable. And they think that this is spreading misinformation. But the problem is you have to look at the information and figure out whether it makes sense or not, and whether there's an analysis behind it.
There's never been a time in human history when there hasn't been misinformation. When you're
Yep,
going
that's
for a
true.
discovery, right now, every cure for cancer is technically misinformation because we still don't
Right.
have it figured out. We have ways to go about it. We have chemotherapy. We have, like we ablate it with radio waves, but no one has it figured out yet. So to date, anyone that says they have a cure for it is misinformation. Does that mean we stop it? No, we fund it nonstop until we eventually find it. We eventually
Yeah.
find
Well, you verify that their claims have a basis, and then you
it's
fund it.
misinformation to land on the moon. If someone says their rocket works, well, after a lot of tests and a lot of deaths, eventually we walk and then we go, ha, that's how you do it now. But
Yeah.
until it happens, it's misinformation. The world is flat. And if you say otherwise, it's misinformation. There cannot be a heavier than air flight until the Wright brothers do it. But before that, it was misinformation. It will always be misinformation. The human genome is far too complex to map it until all of a sudden it is. And for $20, you can get a cheek swab and have your thing sequenced. Until then, it's misinformation.
Yeah.
There's never been a time when there hasn't been misinformation. It was misinformation to say Russia was certainly going to invade Ukraine. They were just building up armaments.
Yeah.
It's all
Well,
misinformation.
they didn't know that there's no way they took a guess. It was right, but they didn't necessarily know that he was going to invade, in my belief. Yeah.
My
I
point
mean,
is,
sir, I understand it looked like it. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm sure that they were looking at the logistics and things.
I guess my point is when people say things are misinformation, if we could keep all the social media networks that we have right now, but just wind the clocks back 2 decades, and those little blue labels you get on YouTube when it says COVID or there was no election fraud or climate change or whatever. If you had posted a video saying, "Hey man, my dad was a Vietnam veteran and he said our justification to go into Iraq kind of looks like the Gulf of Tonkin and we're just getting pulled down into another quagmire," you get an email that says this video has been removed from misinformation because the
Yeah.
Department of Defense has claimed that there are WMDs in Iraq. And 2 decades later, and 5,000 American deaths and 1.5 million civilian deaths, we all look back and go, yeah, it was misinformation. But it doesn't matter now because Colin Powell's dead.
Yeah.
It's everything's misinformation until it's validated. And that is my pitch.
Well,
to you.
there's wrong information that is there. I mean, the
Consciously
problem is that there are
perpetuating
different
false
motivations.
information.
You can
Yeah.
knowingly tell something you know
Sure.
is wrong. So and a lot of that is going on
Yeah.
both sides in this Ukraine war. You can't get an accurate piece of information from the news at all.
Yeah.
You just can't get it.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is that there's so many things on of all places, YouTube, different people that they're letting, that show you information about various aspects of the war. If you're sophisticated enough to be able to pick through the nonsense from the sense, you can actually get some real information about what's going on.
Yeah.
But you got to be pretty sophisticated, well-trained person.
I think you should definitely publish a paper here. And I think that would be an awesome second episode if you would want to do that.
I can do it sometime. Yeah.
I think we need to do it.
Be happy to do it.
We've been running for an hour and a half. I was going to ask you, I guess we could save it for another time, what you think the Tic Tac was off the Nimitz in 2004. The
what?
The Tic Tac, the UFO. Remember that?
Oh, I don't.
Commander Fravor.
I have no. I just have no knowledge of that at all, to be honest.
Oh, really? Oh, you should watch the Joe Rogan where the Navy Commander Fravor goes on and talks about it, and yeah, it's like it's probably like the only realistic UFO evidence.
Oh, I'm sure there are others realistic ones. The problem is to know what it is. It's very, very hard to. I mean, it's hard. The simple explanation that it's something that is intelligent, that's run by, is hard to believe because of the distances involved. But then there's so little we really know about space and time. You just don't know. And
I think there's two explanations. I think it's not that the distances aren't great. It's that there's something we don't understand yet, just like there will never be heavier.
That's what I say.
Yeah, it's time,
space and time. We don't know.
Or I think they've cooked up something in Skunk Works. They've cooked up something fast.
Yeah, that seems doubtful to me because it's just too advanced. Whatever it is too advanced. It does too many wild things.
Let me dream.
What?
Let me dream.
You could be right. You could be right.
I think Commander Fravor said at the altitudes they were flying at, if the SR-71 went by at full speed, it would take 60 seconds to go over the horizon from where they were. And this thing went over the horizon in under a second. So if you calculate it out, it comes to like Mach 180.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's something is going on that's so beyond our science, and even if it's an atmospheric phenomenon, it's so beyond.
Still, there is no explanation that isn't fantastic. If it's Skunk Works, that's insane. Yeah. If it's alien craft, that's insane. If it's a natural optical phenomena, that's insane. There's no answer that is mundane.
There's nothing that, right. Yeah, I think that's a basically correct statement.
Yeah. Real bold take there, Tommy. The UFO is wild. Yeah.
Okay.
More bold assertions. Dr. Postol, thank you so much for coming on, man. Thank you for an hour and a half of your time. That was brilliant. I thoroughly enjoyed that. I got to
I hope it
I loved it.
Yeah.
I absolutely loved it. Yeah. I don't care what anyone else says. I love it.
Well, that's all right.
So I tell every guest.
But you know a little bit about Postol's world now. What he sees and the way he sees it, at least.
Yeah, and I think the only answer is marry a rich wife and go get in a nice building.
Yeah, well,
Steve seems to
she wasn't rich when I married her. She made it all.
she made it from your grace, from your aura. It's
no, on her own. She's smart.
Safe answer.
Question is she? If she's so smart, why did she marry me? But that's
that's the paradox. There's the paradoxical question. It's what was the Tic Tac and why is she with me? Two questions that we won't be able to answer.
Right.
Dr. Postol, thank you so much, sir. I will email you this episode when it's up, and I would love to have you on again for either your paper or just to shoot the shit again, because I thoroughly enjoyed that.
Well, I could give you a talk on the Damascus nerve agent attack.
I would love that.
It's important because it's an intelligence failure, and it tells you a lot about what the leadership, how well informed the leadership is. That's why it's important.
Yeah.
And of course, it almost got us into a war that was in some ways like Vietnam. I mean, it's not unlike the Gulf of Tonkin incident, where we acted on intelligence that was not correct,
faulty, yeah.
And we escalated the war in Vietnam. Maybe something else would have done that anyway, but we could have gotten ourselves really into a sticky place with Syria.
Yeah,
if the president acted on what he was intending to do.
Well, I think that would be an awesome second episode, and I think that's a great
Yeah.
teaser for it.
Okay.
Thank
Well,
you, sir.
we can talk about it. You take
Yeah.
care.
That was awesome. Thank you so much.
And when if you need to make changes, it's, you know, I mean, emails are great, but I don't check my email all the time. So
noted.
if something sudden comes up and you need to call me.
Yes, sir. I got your number.
I
Yes,
have
sir.
my phone with me.
Noted.
Okay.
Will do. Thank you so much.
All right.
Take care.
Take care, Tommy.